welcome to episode 16 of My Body the Guitar with Karla Linn Merrifield. Great to see you, Karla. Lovely to see you.
You too, Paul. I mean, this is as much with Paul Garthwaite as is with me. So we're the dynamic duo.
Well, I've dressed specially tonight for this as well. I thought, with it being Leonard Cohen, I thought I'd give it a special. Just get the thing sorted out. Yeah. Tonight's subject, Karla.
Yep, Leonard Cohen, Saint Leonard. I've actually written an entire book that's a tribute to Leonard Cohen. I haven't sold it yet, but I've placed many of the poems that are in it. And this is one of my favorite. And for this particular series, I could have put 10 of Leonard poems in My Body the Guitar, but I love this one a great deal. And I think it says a lot about him, not so much as a guitarist, but the whole gestalt of Leonard Cohen and what he was capable of doing with his music. I mean, the gift of his poetry. I mean, he was a poet before he became a singer-songwriter, and that is probably, that was his core. And you listen to his lyrics, and you can see the poet coming through. And then of course he wrote songs, he performed them. And I don't think, I really wanted him in the book because I think a lot of people say, oh, Leonard Cohen, he was a guitarist. And yeah, he sure was. And you listen to, I mean, his the first song that was a hit for him, Suzanne, which is, a classic now. You listen to the intro of that. And he's playing an acoustic. I know for a while he had a Martin, and I don't know if he played a Martin on the original recording of Suzanne or at Isle of Wight, where he performed it early on. But he really did have a gift with the guitar. And he used the guitar for many, many years to compose. And then, started composing on a piano, and then advanced to electronic. He was using his computer and software on his computer to compose in the later years. So I think he deserves a spot in the book. Certainly he was one of my all-time heroes, Saint Leonard. But so I'm giving him, straight from the heart, a place in the book, because I think he really, really deserved it. For the no flash, no flurry. I mean, this is not a Jimmy Page. He was not a Van Halen. He did not use his guitar for showmanship. It was an instrument that served his song and his lyrics, the music and the lyrics. And in that respect, I think, maybe in the same vein as Jackson Browne, although I think Jackson is a little more accomplished than Leonard was. Don't listen to me, Leonard. You didn't hear that. He made the guitar serve the song, and he did it beautifully. So he deserves a place in this.
Absolutely. Well, brilliant. I totally agree, Karla. And so the poem, would love to hear it.
Okay. It's called Autumn According to Cohen. So it's kind of a timely poem if you're listening to this or watching this from the southern hemisphere, say from Australia, where autumn is just about ready to turn into winter. So Autumn According to Cohen. And all the rain falls down. Leonard whispers to me at low volume on Pandora.com about Joan of Arc, of all women. And all the rain falls down. In morning gray, its downpour creaks the gutters as he croons to me by vanilla-scented candlelight. And all the rain falls down. In windlessness, his music comes, to me via the internet radio, his lyrics courtesy of Mozilla Foxfire. And all the rains fall down. On an otherwise prosaic autumn day, Lenny et moi, we've achieved connectivity in shared sainthood, and all the rain falls down. Now, early, the temperature hovers at 59.6. We'll refuse to budge a touch higher today. But the man of my Canadian dreams, he sings, il chante. He plays to me, Jeanne d'Arc, and all the rain falls down.
That was stunning, Karla. Absolutely incredible. I'm going to come and straight ask you. Could we just talk about the title?
That particular morning that I can remember vividly, even though this poem is probably 7, 8 years old, maybe older. I can that morning is still so vivid. I can see exactly where I was sitting at my desk at our house on the lake. And his voice and his music seemed to just define the season, because there's a great deal of kind of melancholy in many of his songs. And this, when the Joan of Arc came on, which is kind of a triumphant march almost, for some reason it just seemed it defined the whole season for me. And hence, autumn according to Cohen. If he were the God who was creating autumn in the Northern Hemisphere, this is what it would feel like.
And can I ask you about the refrain that comes in, Karla, after every stanza? I think
it's kind of a chant. Or turns the poem toward that direction of a traditional chant, the constant repetition, and it reflected the day. This probably took, I don't know how many hours, 3 or 4 hours of noodling to write, and through the whole course of the poem, as I was working, the rain just kept coming down, and in his definition of autumn, that's the way it was. It just kept it was that constant reminder of, and the rain, and all the rain falls down, and all the rain falls down over and over, constantly washing past my window as I wrote.
Brilliant. So, can I ask you, with this poem, Karla, how long did it take you to write in total, do you think?
I think it was a matter of 3 or 4 hours, just trying to, because a lot of it was this particular poem, a lot of it was just sitting and thinking. And I was listening to him on Pandora radio, and I was looking up, and I was looking up lyrics as he was singing, and thinking about what direction the poem was going to go. I knew I was going to write a poem about him and the weather. And, those are kind of like the little vague hints of what this poem was trying to say it wanted to be. I called up the lyrics to Joan of Arc, went through those, and then started noodling and keeping track as I was writing of what was going on outside my window. Yeah, that the rain was still coming down, that it was just kind of blah. It was windless, a windless morning. So by the time, lunchtime rolled around, I had a poem that was pretty well, maybe there were some, there usually are tweaks that go on afterwards. And part of the tweaking with this poem, it's for the most part in triplets, little 3-line stanzas with the insertion of that refrain until you get to the very end when it's a closing couplet, which seemed to like nice and tidy closure on it. So probably the only piece that later on once I got it, I handwrite my poems, and once I got it onto the laptop and saw how the lines were, start playing with pulling the lines apart and seeing what form it wanted to be in, that was the PS. So probably a total of 6 hours of writing.
Something that really jumps out at me in the first stanza, Karla, is Leonard whispers to me in a low volume on Pandora.com. Now, what jumps out at me is that Leonard Cohen's got one of those voices, and his songs, similar to Tom Waits, that really draw you in. When I listen to Leonard Cohen, I'm almost leaning closer to the speaker than I am normally.
Yeah.
Do you find that's an aspect of his music that really draws people in? Because he's one of the greatest storytellers of all time, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. He doesn't, there's no shouting and screaming. I'm trying to think if there is, maybe, what is it? Democracy. His song Democracy is a little more booming. But for the most part, he was a pretty quiet singer. And I think it does. You turn the volume up, but you still find yourself kind of leaning in and paying attention to his enunciation, even as he makes his way through the song and punctuates it with his, the lyrics with his guitar. It's Leonard was an intimate singer. Even when he was in concert, he made you feel like you were all alone with him in the concert hall, and he was singing straight to you. A very humble man, very grateful. He was always bowing to his audience and doffing his hat, his fedora, at his audience, as well as his fellow singers and the musicians in his band. And there's that humility that I think is also, that's kind of the bedrock of his, part of the bedrock of his personality. When he then started singing, there was a quietness to it. You had to really pay attention. Even Hallelujah, which is probably the most sung song on the planet, and how many people? Something like 100 people have recorded Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Even that, which has that, building triumphal feel to it, is still it's a story poem, and it's still a story song, and he draws you in even to something that has that kind of universal power that Hallelujah came to have.
I think that he's because he didn't, with all respect to his singing, he didn't have a natural massive range like someone like Stevie Wonder. Because he had the voice he had, is that his diction is possibly some of the finest diction I've ever heard in my life. And it's really interesting because, like I say, he wasn't a singer with a massive range. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the fact that his attention to detail really draws you in is the mark of a great storyteller. And if I just play the intro to Hallelujah, it's kind of it's like a major to a minor. But he's really clever because he's got this is an F major chord, and this is a D minor chord, and in terms of music, those two chords represent a relative major or a relative minor, so they're very closely connected. So when you hear them together, it's like, oh yeah, that sounds. It really sets up. It sets up some tension to kind of really tell a story, because the when I hear people singing Hallelujah, and of course his version is an incredible version, the focus is always on the words, isn't it? You've got to have great diction for that type of thing, and every word is really enunciated so beautifully that it's almost, I totally agree with what you're saying. With singers like Leonard Cohen and Tom Waits, you really kind of, they're just singing for you. And I can't think of many people that
Yeah.
serve the song, in the same level as those people do.
Yeah, I think it's the poet coming through in him. And then, and part of it may also be, I mean, he grew up in Montreal, so he grew up bilingual. Um, and that's why some French toward the very end makes it into the poem. And he was a Jew, so he also knew Hebrew. So I think and a poet, okay, on top of it. So I think he had, with that gift of having three languages, and maybe there were more, I don't think so, but three languages, a poet, and then he picks up an acoustic guitar and starts messing around in his youth at the coffee shops in the the hippie area of Montreal. He knew the power of words at a very young age, and that whole, I mean, when you think about the French versus English of Quebec, I mean, there's all kinds of tension between that and what the whole movement that caused Canada as a nation to make the entire country bilingual in at least in terms of official publications, signage. I mean, everything has to be in both language from shore to shore.
Sure.
That the Quebecois were just so adamant about their heritage that it had an impact nationwide, and it had to have an impact on people who lived in Quebec and were basically on the English side of the fence, but they grew up. Of course, they learned French, and Leonard among them, and a poet no less, who's sensitive to words and the differences between languages. So I think that that knowledge of languages, his being a poet, that gets translated into his delivery, or did get translated into this quiet, almost whispering, where you want to hear every word, and the reward then is there. The story reward.
Absolutely. Can we go to the second stanza, Karla? Because this is so beautiful. In the morning gray.
Okay. In morning gray, it's downpour, creaks the gutters as he croons. To me, my vanilla scented candlelight, by vanilla scented candlelight. And in this one, again, I'm still establishing, okay, the first stanza I've established, all right, here I am, I'm listening to Leonard Cohen over the internet. Now here's a glimpse at my world that I'm sitting in. And you've got this tension between his crooning this song about Joan of Arc, and yet you've got the tension with the creaking gutters that are right outside my window. And that was a deliberate sonic assault, in a way, on the ear, to get that kind of contrast between the noise of the downpour and the gutter creaking, with his crooning to this, in this atmosphere where there's candlelight and it has a vanilla scent. So that there's a lot of tension going on in that little stanza of three lines. To, again, I'm still establishing mood and setting the tone for what the magic is going to be, the real magic.
It's so beautiful. I was just thinking, like I said, it's with that. It's kind of, I just love the way you kind of you well, everything about it, but particularly, and all the rain falls down really kind of resolves the whole chapter, doesn't it? In that, if I was just thinking, I've not actually rehearsed this as usual, but if I use the chords to Hallelujah, I could kind of set that to I'll set that verse to words. morning gray, a downpour, it creaks the gutters and croons to me by vanilla scented candlelights, and the rain falls down. So it's really beautiful. So I mean, all your work is so beautifully written, kind of, for certain. But I just think that is, I can see you've written something down, and it's gone right in my brain, and I can see the absolute picture of where you're at the moment. That's amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you for that impromptu performance. I mean, I got tears in my eyes.
Well, I'll cheer it up next time. But it's one of those things, kind of, I think, where I would suggest that with him, his lyrics would come first, and he would put the music to it, because he's such a wordsmith, isn't he? I think.
Yeah, and that was pretty much the way he proceeded, and he was obsessive about writing his songs. And I can't remember which one it was, but there was one that in one of his biographies I read that I mean, he was years writing it. Fussing, and he'd make a recording for himself, and then he put, and he had these notebooks that he carried around, very simple notebooks, and wore them out, just obsessively, tweaking every phrase in a lyric, until he got it exactly where he wanted it. So his songs, unlike this poem, did not come after 4 to 6 hours of work. They came sometimes years later, where he kept obsessively going back and trying, noodling those lyrics until he got it. And then some of them were written. Most of them, I think, were, from what I recall, they were written as lyrics, and then they became songs. But they were off, especially later, he started doing more, because he was playing around with the computer, and their different, capabilities. And he, so he's able to maybe try it, lay down a few bars, to plug in the lyrics, nudge the lyrics, and see what's going on, and so on. But yeah, it was the poet at work first, and then the musician. And I'm sure, you cannot, I don't think, if you're writing a song, not that I've written that many, but you can't not start hearing things going on in your head, like you just did. I mean, you just heard, let's just use the hallelujah chords, and see where it goes. And I'm pretty certain that there were, he might have made little notes. They have not come out. They have not published his notebooks yet, but I would imagine that in the years to come, gradually we'll start seeing, his letters, his correspondence, his notebooks come out, his son and daughter, bringing those forth as part of his state. Who knows if, he may have even made specific plans for that, but I would love to see those notebooks.
Yeah. And
I have yet to go to his grave. So I have a trip to Montreal that I must be making soon.
Well, absolutely. He's such an influential artist, I think, Leonard Cohen, as well, because I mean, he's an artist that I didn't actually know. Well, I still don't know a massive amount, but I really kind of passed me by when I was growing up listening to music. But since I've got into his music, it's just, it's very deep music, isn't it? Very deep music, very detailed, and a bit like Bob Dylan in terms of the lyrics are really on. I don't think he really uses cliches very much, does he? Or if it's not really that type of, it's not that type of lyric. If I think he for me, he was always wanting people to really be investing in his time, in his music, not just knocking it on and saying, yeah, this is great. You know,
Right.
The fact that you've written how many poems? What did you say? Almost a whole book?
Oh, yes, I wrote, it's easily 100-page book that's just about him, a tribute to him.
So
I
I
mean,
mean,
that's how influential. I did discover him when I was a teenager of 14 and Suzanne came out. And I was like, it's like instant love.
what was it about Leonard Cohen that really drew you in, Karla?
It was the poetry. It was poetry. The lyrics. I mean, you listen to Suzanne. I mean, this was his first big hit. And you listen, I mean, I'm still listening to that and I'm going, where did he come up with some of this? And we now know the story and who he wrote it for and who Suzanne represented. So we know, biographically where it was engendered or how it was engendered. But then you listen to the lyrics and, all of a sudden, Jesus comes into the picture, and then we're back in Montreal, and the waters that run by the city, the St. Lawrence River. I mean, it's an astounding creation. And I was a budding poet, and he spoke right, in that really sexy voice, spoke right to my spirit from that early age.
That's very interesting that you say about a sexy voice, because he was so different from everyone. He kind of, you've got boy bands and stuff like that. Well, to me, people like Leonard Cohen, Tom Waits, it's a different way of delivering a song, because he's not singing particularly high. He's kind of, it's I don't want to use the word genuine, but it's kind of, it's more, it's him, isn't it? That's how he sounds. He's not singing falsetto, which, with all respect to people that sing falsetto, that's great, but he's kind of telling you as it is. It's very direct music, I think.
Yes, good word, direct. And I think the directness of it also is very much linked with that overriding humility that he brought to life, to his life. I mean, this is a man, all right, who was a Talmudic scholar, had lectured several times in Jewish forums in Montreal, really, the stuffed shirt, scholarly types. And then years later, took himself up a mountain and became a Buddhist, and eventually was ordained a Buddhist monk. I mean, it an astonishing life, and that, between his Judaic background and then you have the Buddhist impact. You have a man of just profound spirituality, who was, yes, quite sexy. So I think, that's part of it. He was who he was. And there was no forcing it. And I mean, he did rousing songs like Closing Time, which is a real kind of a almost humorous, but a real rousing song. I mean, he could do an incredible range of songs, but they were him. There wasn't a phony bone in his beautiful body.
Could we go to the next stanza there, on the otherwise prosaic autumn day?
Okay. Again, the weather. In windlessness, his music comes, and which is the perfect background for Leonard Cohen. There's not all this thrashing going on out, but in windlessness, his music comes to me via the internet radio. His lyrics, courtesy of Mozilla Firefox, and this hints. Okay, this is geeky in a way, internet radio, Mozilla Firefox. But this is kind of a hint at the magic that happens at the end of the poem, that the transformative magic that happens. We don't understand how, most of us don't understand how, we can click on the Pandora app, type in Leonard Cohen, and all of a sudden we've got his music. And then, and then you have a browser, another geeky thing. My preference, Mozilla Firefox, which just has a cool sound to it, that's spitting up, bringing up the lyrics for me so I can listen and study the lyrics as he's singing. So there's this, what's this? Because I've referenced Pandora, and now we're back.com, and here we are, internet radio, Mozilla. And again, and it's putting it in the poem in context of the modern era. And it presages in this mind that there's this kind of spooky stuff like, the internet that delivers this stuff magically to us, and all we have to do is press the button on our keyboard. So.
One thing I was going to ask you about this about the Pandora style of it depends. I think what age people are, because if people grow up like we did, buying records and studying record sleeves and putting the record on the needle, looking after the record, cleaning it and stuff like that. And I don't know, I think that, would you say that stuff like Pandora, when you hear one of your favorite Leonard Cohen songs, would you say that sometimes it kind of takes you back to you can see yourself looking at because you can see yourself looking at the album, and then you can see where you were when you had the album. You can see where you bought it, what you did,
right.
The whole thing. And it even brings back, I can almost smell, when I think of a record now, I can smell the record itself. I think, this record smells great. When you take it out of the packet and you've got the inner sleeve, you've got the vinyl. Is there an element of that, Karla, do you think, with his music?
I think that's a hidden foil in the poem, that here we are in this modern era, and we're listening to music on these gizmos, and but wow, there was a time when we walked into the record store, and you bought and you cracked, you had to take your fingernail or a letter opener or something and crack the plastic shrink wrap off the album. And then you mentioned pulling the album out, and it's in that sleeve with the little plastic window so you can read the label, and you pull it, and then you pull the record out carefully, and there was that kind of like static electricity as the paper of the wrapper with that little cellophane, I guess, window pulling against the vinyl. And you didn't get shocked, but you could feel that static electricity. I mean, it was a very visceral experience. And then, of course, carefully putting it down on the turntable.
Oh, I think. Well, that last bit, kind of, to me, that is the thing, because modern technology is amazing, as we know. I mean, but for me, it's the actual. Now I sound like a real geek. When you put the record, the needle on the record, then you put the needle on the record, and then you've got to walk back to your chair or wherever you are, and then you're waiting for the sound to come out, and that is a wonderful, wonderful feeling, I think, when you're actually there and you can hear it, maybe crackle a bit, and all of a sudden it starts, and it's like, because I think, and it's the whole, my bedrooms in my 70s used to smell of records, because there was box sets everywhere, 80s box sets everywhere. I used to spend all my money on records and cassettes and things like that, and it's just like, it just brings the whole experience back. Particularly with people like Leonard Cohen, because would you say that they're kind of album orientated artists, although they obviously release singles?
Right. I would say so. It's an interesting question, but they, when Leonard or that era, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan went into the recording studio. I mean, every album happens differently. But there was usually that sense of awareness of, okay, we know we're going to record Suzanne, Hallelujah, Joan of Arc, I'll, Take Manhattan, Famous Blue Raincoat, whatever the album turns out to be. There's a sense of, first of all, you had side A and side B. Yes. So what are the side A songs going to be, and what are the side B songs going to be, and how are you going to construct? They're almost like the songs, the tracks for an album become their own. I want to say the novel is too long, but in each song is a chapter in the album. Yeah. And how do they flow from one to the next? How do you continue the flow when you flip it over, and where do you end up on the sixth or seventh song on side B that you took this journey from number one on side A? So I think there was a lot more conceptual work going on in the recording studio to, we knew you're going to lay down this one, and this one, but where are we going to put them, in what order, and what's going to follow what? And how are we going to, where's the fill going to come, and will it help, keep the momentum going? Are you going off something that's rather brash to something, really quiet, or something dramatic like Cohen's The Partisan, which is a pretty tough song about, resistance fighters. And it's not clear which war or whatever it is, but the partisan is this guy that's running for cover in a war element zone or era, because he's part of the resistance. So you come off a song that's got that political weight, heavy duty weight to it. What's going to follow? Do you follow it with a love song? So Long Mary Ann, will that work? There a lot of thinking and brainstorming went on I'm sure before they walked into the studio, but definitely in the studio, is how is this going to be constructed? The whole opus.
Mm. I think one of the great things about Leonard Cohen's, many things about Leonard Cohen's records, is that there's a fantastic team around him of musicians that just want to serve the song. No one's got that's part of different types of music, but no one's got a great lick they've got to get into every song. No one's got to have a solo in every song, which is fine in other music. But with this one, everything is serving the song, isn't it? Lou Reed's another artist that I can think of with a similar type of storytelling ability to really tell a story, because they're I think like say maybe earlier, when the voice isn't traditionally beautiful as a Sinatra or an Ella Fitzgerald or Stevie Wonder or anything like that, then they're really the intimacy of the performance is really everything. I think really, same with Bob Dylan, because dynamically there's a real intensity by singing quietly, and there's not many people do that actually. And most singers, if they have the ability, cannot wait to get to the big notes. You got that, and that's great. I mean, that's a great part of, that's a lovely part of singing, of course. But I think because there's some restraint in what they do. Mark Knopfler is another one who kind of, I would call them slow burners. I think slow burners, because it kind of goes like this, and there's no like this. It's not like a Celine Dion song where she hits the note and everything goes up, and it's kind of very it's theatrical in another way. I think in terms of really building the tension and release in a very different way, and I think it's something that young writers could really benefit from studying people like Leonard Cohen and Tom Waits, because there's such a craft in there that's not, it doesn't bang you over the head and say, this is fantastic, listen to me. It's not like Van Halen, where I love Van Halen, where you hear it and just think, oh my God, it's everywhere, it's right at you. This kind of, it's a bit, it's a slow burner, but once people study their lyrics and the whole ethos of bringing the listener in, that is a really valuable lesson, I think,
It
for
is.
anybody. It is for me. It's really a really valuable lesson in the fact that you don't have to smack someone around the head to get their attention.
Right. I mean, and my metaphor would be, you don't have to be Frank Zappa.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just somebody who I have tried, and I will never have a taste for Frank Zappa, ever. I have tried mightily, and it's just an assault to my ears, and I just don't want to hear it. And he's kind of like the Leonard Cohen. There's like two extremes. But what you're saying about younger performers, the Jimmy Pages of the world got, so much glory, Van Halen. It's just, even Bruce Springsteen, who's probably not the greatest guitarist, of course, but, there was just so much energy and stuff. And I should take that back a little bit, because Bruce can get quiet. But I think it would behoove, students who are studying music, whether to perform or write, compose, to give some of these choir folks a chance, and to see what the power, how you can hold, and you could sing as quietly as Leonard did, in Winchester Cathedral, and be able to fill the entire church and everybody, the cathedral, and everybody would be riveted. There's just something commanding about, that we often overlook in this noisy, cluttered world, about that soft approach to communication. I mean, if I lean into you and I start whispering, you're going to listen to hear what, you want to hear what's going on, and that's just part of human nature, I think. We're sitting around a fireplace with our caves, our caveman skins on and stuff. And the first singing starts happening, and we're all leaning in toward the fire, as the first singer utters some tonal something that will become a song, and we become, thousands of years later, these proficient songwriters.
I was going to ask you this question, Karla, in the last couple of things. I forgot to ask it, because I'm going to ask it now. In your early days, would you get round, like a table or a room with other poets and read your work with other poets?
Sure. Usually, in high school, most high schools, I hope they're still doing this. I hope there's teachers that encourage it. We had an annual literary magazine. And when it came out, that was a big deal in the spring. Oh my God, you'd even smell it. You could smell the ink. It was just from the publisher. And whoever the literary magazine advisor, the faculty teacher on the team, would convene then a reading. And, sometimes it was on the assembly stage, and sometimes it was held in a large classroom where you could accommodate, a number of English classes who might, the teacher said, you got to go to this poetry reading, So that's even in English classes in high school. Part of the deal is when you get to the unit on poetry, you got to read it aloud, because poetry was originally an oral tradition. The bards they memorized everything and went from town to town to town to tell these poem stories, and it was an oral tradition. So that's, that still continues. And people, I hope that high schools in the US, I don't know about the UK, are still doing that kind of thing, where there's this artifact that students themselves write and put together and design and make, and then it's published, and then it goes public, and there's a reading of the works inside. It's great practice for a young person.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love it when you read your poems, because it there's nothing like hearing the spoken word. As on, I mean, it's fantastic on the page when you hear the spoken word with all the inflections and the feeling behind it, and the commitment behind it. It's really special, and it's like we live in a world now where, technology is just going crazy, and it's everything's at the click of a button. But you cannot. I think, and that this is the thing that with your work, and of course the people you're writing about, especially Leonard Cohen, is you can have all the tech you want, but once somebody sits behind a microphone or sits in front of a computer and speaks, to me that's the true test of what great communication is and great art is. Did Leonard Cohen start off in folk clubs? In Canada?
Yes. Coffee houses, and folk group gatherings, in Montreal, in the kind of the hip district of the city, where people, young people, University of Montreal students, McGill University students hung out. Their professors hung out. A lot of their professors hung out with them. And you had that, it was the era of berets and beatniks, and of course the Montreal version of that. But still, that was the era, and that's what you did. Drank endless cups of coffee in coffee shops, and listened, and snapped your fingers when the poets finished, and that was the scene.
It's a wonderful scene, I think, and it's something that, well, I mean, in nowadays, I'm out of touch actually with that type of thing, but. I know that folk music is still very, very big, and very, very popular, and I think it's very interesting. The modern poets, a lot of the modern urban music, the rapping and stuff like that is maybe not my cup of tea, but they're kind of continuing that tradition of telling stories over music, regardless of, and Duke Ellington said there's two types of music, you like it or you don't, and it's it's very, very interesting how Leonard Cohen really would be a massive influence. I think also on people like Mark Knopfler, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Mark is kind of this era's, I mean, because he's still making music. I think, a lot of his roots, I mean, listen to Telegraph Road.
Yeah.
There's a story poem for you. And fascinates me, it's a story poem. I got to read more about how that song came to be, because it's astounding that Telegraph Road, which is a monstrous piece of music, that builds to the most incredible climax. But it's a story about America. This is about our westward passage and how we moved across this continent to settle. And you think about it, here's this Englishman who's writing what's basically a folk song about a slice of American history as the frontier opened up, and the railroads followed, and the schools and the lawyers, and you listen. He tells such an incredible story about bringing us from the early settler, this fellow in the poem or the lyric, who goes and builds his little cabin in by a lake that's somewhere out there on the frontier, and then Mark takes you all the way through the story to the modern era and traffic jams and how the whole country got built up in one song.
Yeah. I mean, But this is really brings me to another point. I was going to ask what your thoughts are, Karla. Is that um, after people leave school, sometimes they think, okay, that's it. I've finished learning now. I can just get on with things. But one thing that your work and all the work that all the artists you've been writing about, is that the study never stops, does it? Do you find? I mean, and it's the depth of your. And when I've been reading your other work, the depth of knowledge and craft just jumps off the page, and it's exactly the same. When I hear these artists, and there's some of these are new to me when we've done these, it's beautiful, and it's the depth of expertise that really is incredible, really, and the fact that it's one of the great messages of your book, I think, is that you never ever stop. None of us ever stop learning, studying, and pushing for new things. Every session we've had like this has been just like, oh my God, I've had a light bulb moment. Every session we've had, it's like,
No,
I should do that. How do you feel about that, Karla? About the depth of study that obviously you have, and all the artists you're talking about?
I just can't write a poem. I mean, I can write, little personal domestic poems, that have grown out of my, grow out of my life, like the book I wrote about my husband and his illness and death and dying, and then my life beyond it, which is very personal. But I lived it. So that was my research. For this kind of book, and the Leonard book that before My Body Guitar, the guitar, I can't not do tons of research. I mean, if I say this poem took 6 hours to write, well, that's not even taking into consideration, dozens and dozens of hours of reading biographies of Leonard Cohen, studying the lyrics, listening. I don't think that Mark Knopfler wrote Telegraph Road without some really good research behind it. He understood and could bring to life one human being among all those thousands and thousands and thousands of settlers that moved across this wilderness and made a country out of it. And Leonard was like that. He was a scholar. I mean, not just a Talmudic scholar. He immersed himself in the context of what he was writing about. I'm thinking of Famous Blue Raincoat, which is basically a story poem song about a love triangle. A love triangle, but it's part of the richness of that song comes from his knowledge and awareness and probably research about, Esalen, which was this huge movement in the United States in the late 70s. That people went to California to this institute and learned how to live right, so to speak. Was always flying off for another retreat and stuff. Anyway, but Leonard Cohen could not have written Famous Blue Raincoat without a really solid knowledge of what that movement and self-help stuff was all about, to make it work. He's talking to this, he's basically addressing one of the members of this love triangle, the fellow who moved to, New Mexico, to have you gone clean? And that came right out of the Esalen movement. And he had to be very aware of that. And he lived in California for a long time. And he'd spend 6 months in LA, and then he'd go back to Montreal, and then and then for later in life, spent a lot of time in LA. And of course, that's where he also did his Buddhist training. So, yeah, I mean, I just think you can't, you know, you can, but boy, I think you get a lot more depth if you pay your dues and do your homework. And whether that's reading books or articles or online or verifying dates. I mean, sometimes it's just stupid details like, okay, so what date did this guy die?
Mm.
How long has he been gone from our world? What era did he depart us? I mean, just something that's a little fact like that can help you find enable the truth to come out of your poem, that it's authentic. And I guess that's the bottom line, that you want authenticity in your poems, and it's certainly an element of that is the background work that nobody sees, to be able to write with some authority.
That's Enable the Truth is what a great title, Karla. Enable the Truth. That is, I mean, that's such a great answer, because I think it is something that is really that bears out the whole work that you're doing, with all your work, is that it really, people are reading stuff that is the truth. It is totally genuine, and it's a wonderful thing. Wonderful thing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think part of it, of that authenticity, has to do with the singer songwriter or the poet's relationship with his or her audience. You don't want to get caught up. You don't want to get caught telling an untruth, like missing a key fact about someone's life. Like I mean, it could be something stupid like, so long, Marianne, and you don't know who Marianne is. So you get some fact wrong in the poem that you're writing in response to his song about Marianne. And that's kind of cheating your reader.
Yeah.
You want to be, I'm a stickler, and I've written quite a number of books about, there's nature poems or poems of place, where I've been in Alaska or the Amazon or Africa. And I want those details to be real. I don't want to put a polar bear in Antarctica because there aren't any. And people do that all the time. I mean, I'll see it. I used to see it when I was editing poetry, and I'd get there'd be something just grossly wrong in a poem. I mean, it may be a fairly well-crafted poem, but the poem was like, what planet are you on? There are no polar bears in Alaska. There are no penguins in Alaska.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, yeah. Except the ones in the zoo and Anchorage or the Seward Aquarium.
Yeah.
It's just anyway. So I do. I think you owe it to your reader to tell it true.
I totally agree, Karla. I think this is just the whole book is just wondrous. Actually, I mean, it's something, it's something that I think people could read a different poem every day and just go back to the same thing, because there's so much in there. I'm still picturing the lake, but with the second one, with the morning grey downpour creeks, that's such a beautiful way of painting with words. It's wonderful. Is there anything you'd like to add, Karla, that we haven't covered?
I guess as we head to towards wrapping up here, one of the things that happens in this poem, and it's rather subtle. So we come off that stanza about the geeky stanza about Mozilla and internet radio. And then I talk about Leonard and me, kind of coming together, connectivity, which is an internet word. So I've kind of held on to that concept a little bit, that somehow across miles down the superhighway from wherever the song is coming from into my study, and I'm listening to it, that we achieve this shared sainthood Now, that's pretty kind of egotistical to say that he's helped me achieve sainthood. But what happens if you read a little further, in this kind of Canadian dream world that I'm in with him, he makes me become Joan of Arc, so that it ends that he's not singing about her, he's singing to me. He sings Il chante, he placed to me, Jeanne d'Arc, and all the rain falls down. He has turned me, I just got chills.
Yeah.
He has turned me into Joan of Arc, the power of his song to make me feel what that woman of hundreds of years ago felt, as she was sticking to her guns, to put it kind of prosaically, and willing to die for it at the stake, burned at the stake. And then the very last line, and this is where the payoff, where that refrain line comes in. So he's turned me into Joan of Arc, Jeanne d'Arc, and I'm burning it. I mean, I imagine burning at the stake, but all the rain is falling down on my funeral pyre. So that's what the rain really means. He not only sang the song, he made me feel something of what it must have been like to have been her. And then he's soothing me by this rain that's constantly falling down and smothering the funeral pyre. I mean, it's a little far-fetched, but that's in
It's
there.
amazing.
If you dig a little bit, it's in there. And the bottom line, that I will shut my trap about, is that and all the rain falls down. In the Jewish tradition, rain is a mitzvah. It's a blessing. That's so that kind of awareness of his spiritual tradition in the context of this poem is also at play. If you're a Jew reading this, you'll get that right away.
That's amazing. What an amazing. It was almost an hour. That was fantastic, Karla. That it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, and like I say, for anyone, for Leonard Cohen fans, this is a must. This is a must watch. What a masterclass in poetry, Karla. They're all been masterclasses in poetry. Thank you so much. That's been
thank you, Paul, and
pleasure.
thank you for your moment of just taking that stanza impromptu and creating your magic.
It's a pleasure. I'd love to actually do it properly, and I'll set some music to it. It's gorgeous. Thank you so much, Karla. We very much look forward to the next one. Thank you so much.
All right. Yes, Joni Mitchell up next.
I cannot wait. Bye-bye.
Bye.